How do we develop curiosity? And how do we continually develop a thirst to learn? Because that's what we need in the workforce today. When I look at resumes or when I look at credentials of people who want to work with us, very few of them have a longevity of 5 years anymore, right? They were here for 2 years. They were there for 3 years. They were there for a year and a half. And so I think it's just a different mindset there too as a leader. I'm not expecting that people will stay with me forever. I want to train them well enough that they can leave and treat them well enough that they don't want to, and create enough opportunity for them here that they can explore and grow and create those opportunities for themselves here. But I think we need to also recognize that that may not always be the case. So how do we get people into the most productive mode, the most creative mindset as soon as possible?
Welcome to the Leaders in Tech podcast. This podcast is dedicated to get the wisdom out of the heart of people in technology that are changing this world for a better place. How? By being exceptional leaders, by showing grit, wisdom in their careers to the point that got them where they are right now. And why do we want to share this wisdom? For a couple of reasons. Number one, to let the world realize that without leadership, we have nothing. Because technology has been built by people and for the people. So that if we don't know how to lead people to create technology, we wouldn't have technology to begin with. So what a beautiful example of an amazing leader like today's guest. John, welcome to the show.
David, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today and share some thoughts and just have a great conversation.
Wonderful. John, for the audience, can you give me your full name? Where do you live and what do you do for a living?
Yeah, super. My name is John Rathje. I'm the Vice President and CIO for Kent State University. I've been here around 5 years, and Kent State is a nationally recognized R1 institution with around 35,000 students, and numbers of incredibly fantastic things happen here. In fact, one of the things that was a technology boon for all of us was liquid crystal, which led to touch screens and the like. That was birthed here. So that's maybe an unknown fact that I'm happy to share.
That's amazing. You know, we wouldn't be having this podcast if it wasn't for the invention that your university created.
There's a lot that goes into all of that. And it's one of those things where you realize just how impactful research is and just how impactful creative minds are. And that's one of the reasons I found my way into higher ed and have found a home here, is you're surrounded by incredibly brilliant people who are thinking about the future and looking at ways in which we can take different innovations and inventions and be able to commercialize them, bring them into the common good for all of us. So it's my pleasure to be here and just, again, share those thoughts and share what might be on your mind as well.
You know, it's such an honor to have you with us. And for people out there, if it wasn't for universities and if it wasn't for research, we wouldn't be where we are right now. If you think about it, my personal experience, I live in the same town as University of Waterloo. And out of University of Waterloo, Mike Lizardes came out with the idea of creating a smartphone. And that was the birth of the BlackBerry, the first device in the world that had push notifications. And that revolutionized the world. I know now we have iPhones and much better things, but if it wasn't for that university that enabled these people to be creative and have the research and the funds to actually do that, you know what he did? He donated millions and millions of dollars back to the university because he became a billionaire with this invention, right? So,
yeah, David, when you look at really where we are in our society globally today, everything seems to be interwoven with some form of technology that enables it, that protects it, that allows it to advance or to scale. And I wonder, just taking a look at if we just look at the Industrial Revolution over the last couple hundred years, right, just the time spans in between each Industrial Revolution has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter, and the impact of each of those revolutions have been phenomenal, from steam engines through sending people to the moon. And now we're talking about things like artificial intelligence and augmented reality, and thinking about quantum computing. And so I'm really curious what the next 5 to 10 years hold.
It's going to be beautiful. And people have to realize, and this is for the audience in general, human beings, we tend to complain all the time. But I would love to get a time machine and get the complainers into this time machine and go back to the 1800s and see how people lived there back then.
Isn't that
because they are so afraid of these revolutions, right? So first you had the agricultural revolution. So finally humans didn't have to migrate. They could actually stay in one place and grow families and create cities. Agriculture enabled human society to develop. And then what happened? We created the first industrial revolution. And everything changed again. So now instead of having people to do hard work on the land, now you have machines that can harvest everything and create all the work. And people were afraid. I remember listening to a statistic saying that, in the late 1800s, 1900s, 95% of Americans were hired by farmers.
Correct.
Now it's 5%.
It's 5%, and unfortunately probably shrinking. But what is also amazing is thinking about agriculture, and I grew up on a farm, so this is a really interesting topic for me. The amount of technology actually used in agriculture today is unbelievable. GPS and using cloud-based AI to identify most appropriate uses of fertilizers to help plants and to help the growth, and looking just the way, even the genetics of the seeds anymore. Resilient to certain conditions in the environment and resilient to certain pests. Pretty amazing. Really amazing.
It became a technology play, and that's what fits us, right?
That is.
But now you don't have to wake up at 4 a.m. and go to bed at 7 p.m. with your back wrecked because you were in the field all day just to supply food.
Right.
Now we have machines doing that, and the same thing happened with the Industrial Revolution. Now we still have that 8-hour work day because of that, because they had 3 shifts to run on the factories and run the machines. That's also becoming obsolete.
Correct.
So people complain, but I tell people, technology and revolutions in technology creates a better society. It's always pushing society forward to use our brains more and our bodies less, to have a bit more comfort in life.
Critical thinking will continue to be something, right? There's a lot of debate in our industry today about use of certain technologies, whether or not it takes away the human element. And maybe in some instances, those debates are very warranted. But I think what we need to hang on to is that, to your point, it still takes critical thinking to ensure that we advance what we're doing and to create the environment in which things can thrive and progress. So that is a lot of what drives what we do here, is thinking about the future. It's being ready for anything, being able to lead for what's in front of us today, but developing leaders and developing a mindset that allows us to change and to recognize which changes will help us advance our mission.
It's beautiful. And thank you so much. Thank you for your work, because you're helping advance society. Now, for people that want to eventually get your job, let's figure out how you got there. So let's look back in time and see where were you at the last year of high school. What was in your mind, and what decisions did you make?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. So going back that far is sometimes difficult. But what I would say back then was I was a curious mind. I was interested in how things worked. I had some desire to be an electrical engineer. I ended up getting a degree in physics and then a master's in computer science. But I was thinking about, how can I create effective and efficient outcomes, right? What can I do to help advance different things? So the curious mind was part of my upbringing, part of my interest, and part of what I saw myself being intrigued by and being excited to learn more about.
How does one at the end of high school chooses to have a physics major? Physics is not simple, it's hard.
Well, that story is interesting, David. I actually was fortunate enough to have my collegiate schooling paid for through an athletics scholarship. And the particular university that I went to did not have at that time an electrical engineering degree. And so I thought, let's do the next best thing. Let's get a physics degree, because that's the foundation for many things. And when you think about foundations, all of the advances that we have and what we use in our world today digitally needs to still have a solid foundation. And understanding that foundation really helps us make good decisions about direction, about opportunities, about growth, about patterns that we can build on and scale.
That's fantastic. And talking about physics, once you get into the quantum computer world, physics gets turned upside down, isn't it?
Quantum is an interesting realm that's finding its way into multiple disciplines today, right? Obviously, computing is something we've been talking about for some time now with quantum computing, but even quantum finance, different ways in which you can take variability and predict outcomes is pretty interesting. And I can't remember much about my physics degree. That was a long time ago. But what it did is it taught me how to learn. It taught me how to appreciate how to build something based on a foundation, and how to explore different outcomes, and how to look at what worked and what didn't work as we pursued those different opportunities.
That's fabulous. How did you get into computer science? What was your first engagement with computers?
Oh, my first engagement with computers was in high school. And that was when the PC was really first introduced, but not very many schools had one. We had a single computer in my high school, my senior year. And I asked whether or not I could borrow the computer over our Christmas break. And I wrote a Pong program using simple basic language and the programmability of that computer, which was a Radio Shack Model 1, Level 2 computer, if any of you go that far back. And it just turned me on. To be able to see instantly kind of the outcome of a logical progression of putting code into something was really, really intriguing. But yet computer science wasn't really a discipline that I could pursue at that time in high school. And it was emerging in colleges. And so there was always an interest. And with physics, I had a chance to leverage computers. I had a chance to use computers in some of the experimentation, and just created my own hobby interest in developing programs and doing fun things. And that's really what led to the next stage.
To your master's in computer science.
Mm-hmm.
So physics led the foundation. What did your postgraduate degree did for you?
The postgraduate degree actually helped me formalize some things that allowed me to think about how the different elements of the computer science realm fit together. Data and networking and engineering and logic, along with application development, really thinking about what is the string of thought that moves you from the condition that you want to solve to that condition being solved, and what data needs to be available, and how do you make things effective and user-friendly. I mean, all those things began to really become more and more evident to me as I pursued my master's. It also introduced me to artificial intelligence, and thinking about artificial intelligence beyond the realm of a computer science or a pure scientific method, really thinking about it from philosophy or philosophical point of view, thinking about it from an ethics point of view, obviously thinking about it from a programmatic point of view as well. But realizing that as we began to explore with fuzzy logic or being able to explore with predictability and variability in developing solutions, it really makes you think more broadly about the precise nature of certain types of application development and the predictive nature or the generative nature of application development. And so that early exposure was really interesting to me.
And this is a fantastic topic, and thanks for bringing that up. People look at AI and ChatGPT and all what's happening in the market today, and they think there's something new. And then I told them I had a class of artificial intelligence when I was in college, and that was in the early 90s. Right? So the concept has been around for a long time. And if you think about it, if artificial intelligence is actually having a machine have rational thinking, well, the first programming language for me, if you had the ability to put if statements, do case statements, for me, that's already artificial intelligence. When you can lay down an algorithm and the computer can use that algorithm to make choices for you. Obviously, these are predetermined choices, so it's boxed, right? For me, the genius is when those choices are being written by the computer itself, because it's learning from its own experiences, which is what's happening now, right? With the neural networks.
Neural networks and large language models really have had an impact, and not just that in particular, but the ability to compute these large language models using these incredibly sophisticated, or I should say very significant number of interconnections within these models today. Our ability, like Moore's law is, rest in peace, right? Moore's law is done. It now really, when we see the advent of the compute power and the scalability, that's really what's starting to create these real-time interactions that give people pause to say, what's happening here? When indeed, this is not new. It's just when things are adopted at mass, and you mentioned ChatGPT, it was the fastest to 1 million subscribers. It was the fastest to 100 million subscribers. That mass adoption created awareness. It created additional interest, and it created additional questions that people had not explored before. Mm-hmm. And now we're exploring those questions.
It's incredible. And you actually mentioned Moore's law, and I think for the audience, because you and I know what it is, but I would love to go into that a little bit more in detail. Can you tell me what Moore's law is, and why do you know that it's actually obsolete now? It's done.
Well, there's this idea that we'll be able to continue to double the compute power based on the ability to get smaller and smaller devices. But at some point, what happened is we exceeded that limit. And we're beyond that limit. And we're to the point now where, if you think about, like in '69, we sent people to the moon using a particular type of computer. Well, you and I hold in our hand and our cell phones, 100 times, if not 1,000 times the compute power of anything that was available back then. Now that we can create significant processing power at scale, we exponentially can do things that we could not before. This is, but it's still expensive, right? Mm-hmm. It's still expensive. So I would say over the next 30 or 40 years, maybe sooner, researchers will be thinking about how do they create, this substance that allows us to mass produce these high computing systems, or these significant systems that can compute, to make it more affordable. So anyway, probably an overgeneralized way of looking at Moore's law and what's next, but the limitations of what was initially defined no longer there.
It's fascinating because, one of the parts of Moore's law that I was in awe since I figured it out is that every 18 months technology doubles, and it actually goes down in price every 18 months. And this has been happening since we started with the silicon, right? Like since we went from vacuum tubes and created our first silicon chip, the Moore's law started to take on. And so that the problem is that if you look at the law of compounding, is one of the concepts that is the most difficult thing for a human brain to understand. Because at the beginning, you start compounding something, still looks very flat. But it eventually takes on a hockey stick and it goes exponentially higher, right? I think somebody was telling me that if you were using the law of exponentiality, playing a golf game, an 18-hole golf game, and you started with 10 cents, you ended up with like $10 million at the end or something like that. But it was only 10 cents. And that's what it is. But, but in the fourth hole, it was still for like 50, 60 cents. But by the 18th hole, it was 10 million.
Yeah. And I think one of the newer introduced laws that I just came across recently is Martek's law. And Martek's law really kind of picks up where Moore's law now leaves off. And that is, technology is advancing at an exponential rate. But business adoption of technology moves at a logarithmic rate. So you have a logarithmic rate against an exponential rate. And at some point, that gap becomes fairly significant. And I think as leaders, we need to really be intentional about the technologies that we explore, because the advances are significant. So we need to be critical about what it is that we can introduce. But at some point, that gap becomes so large that the business needs to reset. And we're starting to see that over and over and over again globally. So it's an interesting time, to say the least.
For sure. And, I keep telling people that, I run a software consulting firm, and we actually build AI systems and all kinds of custom software programs for companies. And, I keep telling people, we're at the point now that if your business doesn't have some kind of AI embedded in their core, eventually they are going to become obsolete because the competition is implementing AI.
Scalability.
And that lowers costs, right? It gets you down to production faster. So you're going to have a competitive edge if you start using this technology. And it's so exponential that before you know, it's like, how come I'm not selling anything? And it's because your competitor just implemented an AI system that is making your product half the price, twice as good. Right? Incredible. We're living in very incredible times. And, you and I had the privilege to be born in an age where we saw the whole thing evolve, right?
Right.
Like I remember when I was like you, my first computer was a Commodore 64. That's 64K, right? And it was already an advanced computer in 1988.
Yeah, it is amazing. Just thinking about just my career in application development. So I was not always in higher ed. I actually started a software engineering company in my younger years and ran another technology company in the early 2000s. But, we've moved from needing to understand procedural approaches to programming to kind of this idea of object-oriented programming, where we can create objects that we can use in different contexts and explore and extend. We're now at low code, no code, right? So a lot of that logic and a lot of that work is behind the scenes. We just need to wire diagram things. We need to think logically and critically think. And that's why I come back to that. It's important as leaders to really assess what we're trying to solve and take a look at the X factors, I'll call it. The expectation and the experience. What's the expectation that people have, and what's the experience they receive, and how can we create a frictionless way to deliver that? How can we reduce the variability in delivering solutions and make the outcomes much better for the people that we serve? And we can do that at greater scale today, speaking about scalability, because we don't have to do all of the same overhead work that we've had to do in the past in our computer science disciplines. Reusability, modularity, really thinking about autonomy of components that can operate on their own but can be stacked or stacked differently to create outcomes and solutions really is the new mindset. It's the new thinking. It's the new architecture. And we're beginning to take a technical concept and bring it into business context and saying, what if we took big business ideas, big processes, and began to break them down into smaller units, like this, then that, then this, then that, maybe a decision tree somewhere that does something similar, something slightly different in order to get to the outcome. What if we do those things and work together so that we can take the same intellectual property we have and the same work that we've been doing, but look at new ways of improving margin, efficiency, but also potentially looking at new revenue streams, creating faster ways to get to outcomes. I think this is really the exciting part to me about all the technology advances, is how do we think differently? What's our mindset now to fall in love with the problem and not the solution? And that also excites me, right? So I've gone from kind of more of a technical background into a technical manager background into a leader of ideas and a leader of outcomes. And the next decade is going to be exciting with all of the tools and all that's in front of us, David. I am really excited for what we as technology leaders can really bring now full circle into society, working with multiple industries, working with multiple areas of functions to deliver great outcomes.
It's fascinating, for sure. What was the first time that you were exposed to leadership? When did you get your first people that you were responsible for?
Well, early on, actually. The work that I did in college also involved having students that, when I was a student, I actually had students that reported to me for developing solutions or doing things. But then, I think I shared with you early on, I worked as a software engineer in a company formally for a couple of years, and then left that company and started my own. And when I started my own company, the interesting thing, David, is I didn't have an MBA. I hadn't really studied anything about managerial accounting or anything like that. But I'll rest back on my physics degree. I knew how to learn. I wasn't afraid of problems. And I recognized that the big thing that people wanted was to have a great experience. They wanted to be served and served well. So in my first company, I took those principles forward, and I learned a lot of what I needed to learn about how to be a leader. I clearly made a lot of mistakes early, but sometimes when you make mistakes, you learn more about how to be a better leader. And so my first experience really was in that realm, and then it just simply grew from there.
That's fantastic. And you're right. If you have the right mentality, the right mindset, when you fail, you're actually failing forward. You just learn a way how not to do something. And if you look back, if you think of Thomas Edison, how many times he tried to create the light bulb? I think it was 3,000 times. And every time he says, okay, this way doesn't work. We failed forward. Let's try something else, until he found something that works.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And I just found something interesting. I forget what context it was in, but it was along the same principle, David, but I found it fascinating because this person was a creator, and they were looking for certain outcomes in the work that they were doing. And they knew at a certain point that it had already failed. And so they could have abandoned. But what they wanted to do is get to the finish line and learn all the different ways that the failure could happen from that point forward, so that they learned what failure looked like earlier, so that the next time they began from ground zero and began to build, they already had intuition as to the adjustments or the changes or what potentially could go wrong. And I found that fascinating, because too often we get to a failure point, we just scrap it and we start over. But sometimes seeing a creative idea that didn't reach its, it's going to fail. Maybe sometimes seeing that through and understanding the different dynamics helps us gain greater intuition into getting to a better outcome. I wish I could remember exactly where I had come across that, but it was fascinating to me. Fascinating.
And I think one of the fundamental skills that is required for somebody to become a true leader is knowing that fact and allowing your people to make mistakes.
Right.
And teaching them how to learn from those mistakes so you can actually build them as leaders themselves if they want to choose the path of leadership. But even if they want to stay being a productive worker, right? Losing that failure, that fear of failure is what creates innovation. It's the only way that humankind will progress if we actually take a step of faith, and then maybe you break your knees the first time. So the next time you do step on that specific spot, you go around it or you go above it, right?
It's so true. And I think, again, I'm fortunate to have had a lot of early life experiences that have really molded and shaped me. I think I shared earlier that I grew up on a farm. Well, you learn a lot about how to be inventive and creative on a farm. You solve problems on a farm. It may seem simple, but there are things you just simply have to resolve. And you find a way, given the resources that you have. The other thing I was very fortunate to be a part of is an athletic team, where you do create failure so that you can succeed. And that's just something that you learn. And you learn that failure is expected in order for you to achieve successes at a greater and greater scale.
Wow.
And that mindset, and you hear me say mindset quite a bit, because what I try to lead is not just what the art of the possible is, but how do you create the mindset that permeates throughout an entire team, so that a team has this symbiotic relationship to each other about how do we not only take care of operational needs, but how do we create? How do we change? And should we fear or should we embrace change? And the mindset today, I think, is one of the most critical things that we can help develop within our teams. And I said this earlier too, fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And recognize that quantity is a force multiplier. The more we work together with different ideas, the better we are. We create stronger solutions. So those are just some fun things that we're doing here.
It's beautiful. And the analogy with playing sports, I think, is one of the key factors for you to become a leader really fast. If you actually play on a team, if you do some kind of discipline that requires you to collaborate with other people, so that you're responsible for failure and also for success on a collective basis. What a way to learn leadership, eh?
Absolutely. I mean, it's, and obviously we have to be cautious, right? We want to give people parameters that they don't hurt themselves or they don't hurt what we do. So I tell my team, if we're not making mistakes, it probably means we're not doing anything. So let's give ourselves the latitude to make mistakes, but let's not make them twice. And when we go into things with that perspective, there's a freeness, right? To do the right thing at the right time. And again, another kind of mindset is, compass is over maps, right? If all you can do is take instructions, turn left here, turn right there, go 10 miles, turn left, you miss, number one, what's around you. And number two, you can't adjust course easily. But if you have a compass, you can overcome barriers. You can go around barriers and get back on track. And, that sort of thinking just, look, I might do it a particular way. David might do it a particular way. How do you do it? Right? Mm-hmm. Again, creative, just having critical thinking and being able to work through problems might be the skill that's most important in what we do over the next number of years.
Actually, John, with the birth of and the exponential growth of AI, if you don't have that mindset, you're going to get replaced by a machine. Now we're serious about this. Mm-hmm. If all you do is take instructions and follow it to the dot, that's not good enough anymore to hold a job, because any AI can do that. Actually, they can do even more than that now.
They can. Right? And this is also something that I think we have to be prepared for, right? So what are the adjacent skills? So if you're doing something that can be replaced by some form of automation, what's the value that skill brings? And can you go an adjacent way with it to help now define a new form of value, right? And I think this is also important. Predictions are fun. They're typically wrong from a time frame, but they're right, directionally. I probably have this wrong, just like my poor definition of Moore's law. But the prediction is something like this: there will be 2 billion jobs displaced. 2 billion jobs displaced by the year 2030. Not a loss of 2 billion needs, but 2 billion jobs that are currently in place today that will be displaced. Now think about that for a moment. Mm-hmm. That's a significant number.
Well, so how do 20% of the world's population,
right?
Including children.
And including children. So how do we develop curiosity? And how do we continually develop a thirst to learn? Because that's what we need in the workforce today. When I look at resumes or when I look at credentials of people who want to work with us, very few of them have a longevity of 5 years anymore, right? Mm-hmm. They were here for 2 years. They were there for 3 years. They were there for a year and a half. And so I think it's just a different mindset there too as a leader. I'm not expecting that people will stay with me forever. I want to train them well enough that they can leave and treat them well enough that they don't want to, and create enough opportunity for them here that they can explore and grow and create those opportunities for themselves here. But I think we need to also recognize that may not always be the case. So how do we get people into the most productive mode, the most creative mindset as soon as possible?
Yeah, and only leadership can do that.
Only leadership can do that.
Right? It's we're in a critical time in the history of the world, and we need more Johns for sure.
Well,
and
you're
that's
very
why I'm making this podcast. That's why I'm making this podcast.
You're very kind, David, but I appreciate your thoughts too. I mean, I can tell without a doubt that this is the way you're thinking. And you're trying to expose different ways in which different people think and the way people lead, so that we can take advantage of the good work you're doing with this podcast to get different ideas to help us grow too.
Right.
I've not arrived where I think I'm going to be yet. I want to continually grow too. So thank you for what you do. I appreciate you.
Oh, my pleasure. You know what? My father, before he died, he used to say that he's going to keep on learning his whole life. And he said, the last lesson that I'm going to learn is how to die.
Yeah.
And he lived his whole life like that way. And that's what I'm trying to do too. Like, to your point, I'm not where I'm supposed to be. As long as God is giving me breath and life, I'm just going to keep on learning. Why? Because I need to keep adding value. Why? Because my life has to account for something. And that's another mindset. As a leader, you need to inspire your people to be people of service, to look after everybody else first,
Yeah,
Because if you have an employee that all they are doing is trying to take care of themselves, you don't want that employee. You want somebody that is helping, and they know that by helping others, they will get their own needs satisfied, right?
David, thank you for that. I think, and thank you for your stance and your perspective, because I think we all have a calling, and if we don't, we need to figure that out. But coming back to the leadership chair for a moment, one of the things I had to overcome is fear of being replaced myself, right? You can't be paranoid as a leader. In fact, if you are leading other people, your expectation should be that they can take your job at any moment, or somebody can take your job at any moment. So perspective that has helped me is that I rent the chair I'm in. I don't own the chair I'm in. I'm here to create a better environment for the time that I'm here to do it, until such time as I'm not the right one to do it. And it keeps me energized. It keeps me thinking about how to invest in other people. It certainly keeps me thinking about how to invest in myself, which is important, but it's not about me. It's about those that I serve and what I do to help them do amazing things.
Yeah, and what a beautiful way to live. The minute that we get settled into a position and we think we're set is the minute that you start dying. Because you have this blindfold of arrogance and ego that says, oh, I'm good at this job, they need me, and nobody else can replace me. Once you do that, is the beginning of your downfall. And it's a lesson very hard to learn. I've been there. That's why I'm saying it, because I've been there, I've done that. And then when I was out of the job, I'm like, what did I do? Oh, I allowed myself to rest. And I thought I was so good that I was irreplaceable, which is the biggest lie you can tell yourself.
A wise person shared with me, and perhaps you've heard this, and so is your audience. If you stick your hand in a bucket of water and you pull your hand out, your imprint's gone pretty quickly. And it just kind of puts in perspective. Obviously, we're here to make a difference, but it isn't about us. And it's about people together doing extraordinary things. And that's really helped me to think about, how can I be a better leader? How can I instill a sense of confidence and growth in other people to become the best them that they can be? So David, thank you for this conversation. It's just been a complete pleasure to be with you. And I look forward to your next podcast.
For sure. And this is your home. We can always come back. I feel that we only scratched the surface. We didn't even talk in detail about your life experience. So yeah, well, let's have an episode number 2. But before we go, let me ask you one last question. If you had access to a billboard in front of the busiest highway on earth, what would you write in it?
Oh my goodness, I don't know that I've ever been asked that question before, and I hope that my mind comes up with what would I put on that billboard? So David, this is personal. I'm a man of faith, and I would have people look up. That would be my number one thing to share with people, and that to me is an incredible ballast. It creates purpose and meaning in what I do and everything that I do, not just the work here, but in my family and in my community. So that's probably what I would say.
Thank you for sharing your faith. If you look at the New Testament and you explore the life of Jesus Christ, he has been the best leader in the history of humanity. And if you follow what he did, he would actually sit down and wash his disciples' feet.
Humility.
He was humble and of service. He understood that he was here to serve. All we gotta do, you wanna become a great leader? Read the New Testament and see how Jesus behaved and try to follow that, and you'll see how you're gonna turn out. Trust me. By the way, for the audience, if you have tried everything else and it failed, give that a try and let me know how it goes.
It is the thing. It's the only thing. So yeah, David. So anyway, you asked the question, and thank you for asking it. That's where my heart is. That's where my head is.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, John. If people would like to get more questions out of you, where can they find you online?
I don't do much on social media, but you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can search for my name in Kent State and you'll find me, or you can John_Rathje, Rathje on Twitter.
Fantastic, John. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. We'll set up an interview number 2. I think we have many things to talk about still. I love interviewing bright minds like you, because we go deep and then more knowledge comes out. And this is the stage and age, like in the evolution of humankind. We are in the information age, but the problem with that is that you have so much information, but the majority of that information is not correct. It's lies and miscommunication and misinformation. So that when I find somebody like you with amazing foundations, true values, and a great experience in knowledge, we need to take advantage of that. I need to get more out of your brain.
Again, you're kind, and I appreciate the time, David. It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Blessings, and have a beautiful rest of the week.
Same to you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Leaders in Tech podcast. Check in next week to keep learning how to use technology and leadership to change the game. See you next time.